The Galactic Hunting Order had dominated interstellar politics for millennia. At the apex of this hierarchy stood the great predator species, physically imposing civilizations that had carved out their positions through natural advantages and remorseless efficiency. Most prominent among them were the Cthar, a hive-minded insectoid species whose intricate war strategies had subjugated dozens of star systems. The Ursarians, enormous bear-like warriors whose physical strength allowed them to wield weapons other species could barely lift. And the Raptors, swift avian hunters whose aerial combat skills made their strike forces legendary throughout the quadrant. These apex civilizations shared common traits despite their varied biologies: reliance on raw muscular power, natural weapons like claws, fangs, or venom, and social structures built around intimidation displays. Their representatives dominated the Alliance Council chambers, massive figures who spoke with the casual arrogance that came from generations of unquestioned superiority. Lesser species, those without biological weapons or overwhelming strength, were acknowledged only as trading partners, servants, or occasionally as amusing novelties. Into this established order arrived humanity. Their entrance to the galactic stage was unremarkable in almost every way. Their ships were of moderate technological advancement, their physical appearance unimpressive, no natural armor, minimal musculature compared to the dominant powers, lacking even basic natural weapons beyond blunt teeth and fragile nails. Initial contact reports filed by Alliance observers classified them as an omnivorous species with herbivore-like defensive adaptations, high endurance, social cooperation, and tool used to compensate for physical shortcomings. The first human diplomatic missions were exceedingly polite, focused primarily on establishing trade routes and cultural exchange programs. Their representatives spoke earnestly of peaceful cooperation, seemed eager to learn about established galactic customs, and showed appropriate deference to the predator species that controlled interstellar politics. The Alliance Council regarded them with mild amusement, occasional condescension, and limited interest. Some members privately assessed humans as potential prey or easily manipulated partners. "They'll find their place in the lower tiers," remarked Thar Ambassador 19 Tick during a private council session. "Useful for their resource mining operations, perhaps. Their worlds have substantial mineral deposits." Only the Mrevnir, an ancient species of data collectors, noted something peculiar about the humans' homeworld in their classification reports. A single footnote labeled Earth as a death world, though no explanation followed this designation. When questioned by curious council members, the human ambassador had smiled and made a casual comment about Earth's challenging evolutionary pressures, which was received with disinterest. Brief mention was made of a military organization called Marine Corps in the list of Earth's defense structures, but it received no more attention than any other human designation. No one in the council chambers that day recognized the significance of either note. The Raptor Confederation had built its empire through swift, decisive action. Their philosophy was simple: when opportunity presents itself, strike without hesitation. When the Raptors detected a lightly armed human transport ship carrying medical supplies through a contested sector, they saw an opportunity to demonstrate the natural order to these newcomers. "These humans must learn about territorial realities," Supreme Hunter Krivak announced to his strike team as their interceptors surrounded the human vessel. "Their diplomats speak of cooperative principles while their ships trespass through our hunting grounds." The human transport complied immediately with the Raptors' orders to power down engines, offering no resistance as boarding parties entered their ship. The human captain, a slight female with no visible weapons, met the boarding party with calm professionalism. "This vessel is carrying emergency vaccines for the Aldebaran colony," she explained, showing documentation. "We filed transit notifications with the Alliance Council." Krivak flexed his razor-clawed hands dismissively. "Notification is not permission, human. This sector falls under Raptor protection. Your cargo is now subject to inspection and appropriate taxation." The meaning was clear. The Raptors would take what they wanted, as was their right as superior predators. The human captain's expression didn't change. though her pulse, visible to Raptor thermal vision, increased slightly. I understand. However, I am obligated to inform you that interference with this shipment constitutes an actionable offense under human law, she said. If these supplies are not released within 12 hours, our government will dispatch Marines to resolve the situation. The Raptor boarding party erupted in chittering laughter. Krivak stepped closer, towering over the human female, his head plumage expanding in the traditional intimidation display. You would threaten the Raptor Confederation? With what? Your soft-skinned warriors. He leaned down until his hooked beak nearly touched her face. Perhaps we should demonstrate the natural order more permanently. The captain maintained eye contact, despite the evolutionary imperative most prey species felt to look away from predator gaze. That would be unwise. I made my government's position clear. 12 hours. The Raptors confiscated half the medical supplies as transit tax and allowed the vessel to continue, confident they had established proper dominance over these new, weak creatures. Krivak filed a cursory report, noting the empty threat the human had made. No one in the Confederation command gave it further thought. Exactly 12 hours later, Raptor border outpost Keswick detected 3 small human vessels entering their territory. The ships were not large enough to be considered warships by Raptor standards, and initial scans showed modest weapon systems. The outpost commander, following standard protocol, dispatched an interceptor wing to drive off or capture the intruders. The resulting engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. The human vessels displayed maneuverability that contradicted their seemingly simple design, evading the first Raptor attack formation with precision that suggested extensive combat simulation. Their return fire was targeted not at the Raptor ship command centers or weapons arrays, as would be logical, but at their sensor systems and engines, temporarily blinding and immobilizing rather than destroying their opponents. Before reinforcements could arrive, the human vessels had already docked with Border Station Keswick. Station Commander Tizaril ordered his warriors to prepare for boarding defense, expecting the human attackers to charge the main airlocks as any sensible tactical force would. Instead, station sensors detected multiple hull breaches at seemingly random points throughout the station's outer shell. The Marines entered simultaneously at 18 different locations, using shaped charges to create precise entry points that minimize structural damage while maximizing tactical advantage. They moved in 3-person teams, their tactics inexplicable to Raptor defenders. Rather than securing territory progressively as Raptor doctrine dictated, they seemed to flow through the station like water, appearing where least expected, engaging only when necessary, and prioritizing movement toward their objective, the secured storage where the confiscated medical supplies were held. They do not fight like predators, a wounded Raptor security officer reported to Tizaril. They do not announce themselves with war cries or challenge displays. They move silently, communicate with hand signals, and strike without warning. My team was disabled before we knew they were in the corridor. Most disconcerting to the Raptors was the humans' refusal to be drawn into direct confrontation. When Raptor warriors established defensive positions in critical junctions, expecting to force the humans into honorable combat, the Marines simply bypassed them, sometimes using the station's ventilation system or maintenance tunnels to circumvent entirely. Their weapons fired projectiles that delivered sedative compounds rather than destructive force. They fight as if victory is already assured, Tyrell observed with growing unease. As if the outcome is merely a calculation to be solved, not a contest to be won. Within 40 minutes of first contact, the Marines had secured the medical supplies, disabled the station's weapons and propulsion systems, and returned to their vessels without a single fatality on either side. Communications restored after their departure included a formal notification that the Raptor Confederation had violated human territorial protection laws and that the incident would be reported to the Alliance Council. When Krivak received the full report, his plumage involuntarily flattened against his skull, an ancestral sign of submission he hadn't displayed since adolescence. The humans had not merely retrieved their property. They had systematically dismantled Raptor tactical doctrines that had remained undefeated for centuries. "What manner of warriors are these Marines?" he demanded of his intelligence officers. "They do not fight as predators or prey." The intelligence analysis provided little comfort. They appear to be a specialized human fighting force with origins in naval-to-land operations. Their training emphasizes adaptability, problem-solving under pressure, and team coordination rather than individual combat prowess. Historical records suggest Marine training deliberately places recruits in situations of stress and discomfort to enhance performance under adverse conditions. Word of the incident spread quickly through Alliance communications channels. Most predator species dismissed it as Raptor incompetence or exaggeration. A few, however, began quietly researching human military history and capabilities. The Mrevnir, reviewing their initial classification of Earth as a death world, added additional notes to the file without comment. The Ursarian Dominion had watched the Raptor humiliation with contemptuous amusement. The bear-like Ursarians prided themselves on their straightforward approach to galactic politics. Overwhelming force applied directly. Their warriors stood nearly 3 meters tall, with massive limbs capable of tearing metal and body armor that could withstand most energy weapons. Where the Raptors relied on speed and precision, Ursarians cultivated raw power and intimidating presence. The Raptors failed because they approached these humans with too much subtlety, War Baron Graddock rumbled to his assembled commanders. A predator does not play with its food. It crushes it completely to establish proper order. The Dominion Council had observed human expansion with growing irritation. Despite their physical limitations, humans had established successful colonies on worlds previously considered uninhabitable, developed profitable trade relationships with multiple species, and even secured a provisional seat on the Alliance Advisory Committee, all within a remarkably short time frame. More troubling to Ursarian sensibilities was the lack of proper deference shown by human representatives during diplomatic functions. They spoke as equals, offered suggestions without being asked, and occasionally even disagreed with Dominion proposals. These creatures require a definitive lesson in cosmic hierarchy, Graddock declared. We shall demonstrate what real power means in this galaxy. The target selected was Outpost Harmony, a joint research installation near the borders of Ursarian space, where humans worked alongside scientists from several Alliance species. With a minimal defense system and significant symbolic value, it represented the perfect opportunity to reassert predator dominance with minimal risk. The attack began with characteristic Ursarian directness. A battle group consisting of 3 heavy cruisers and their escort vessels entered the system without warning and jammed all communications. Dropships deployed ground forces to the outpost's primary access points, while bombercraft disabled its meager defensive installations. Commander Forlag personally led the ground assault, his massive form encased in traditional Dominion battle armor that augmented his already formidable strength. The initial resistance was exactly what he expected: disorganized, panic-driven, and ineffective. The outpost's security force, comprised mainly of automated systems and a small contingent of guards for various species, was overwhelmed within minutes. Scientists and support staff fled to interior safe rooms as Ursarian warriors methodically secured the installation's perimeter. Broadcast on all frequencies, Forlag ordered once the command center was under their control. Inform the human authorities that Outpost Harmony now falls under Ursarian protection. Any attempt to interfere will result in the execution of hostages. The human response came faster than anticipated. Within hours, Alliance monitoring stations detected a human vessel entering the system. A single ship of moderate size, broadcasting identification as UNS Thermopylae. Forlag ordered his cruisers to intercept and destroy it before it could approach the outpost. The Thermopylae made no attempt to evade. Instead, it transmitted a simple message on an open channel: Ursarian forces occupying Outpost Harmony. This is Colonel Irene Martinez, commanding 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. Your actions constitute an act of war against the United Earth Government. You have 1 hour to withdraw all forces and release all personnel. This is your only warning. Forlag's command staff erupted in roars of amusement. The human vessel was outnumbered, outgunned, and making demands as if it held tactical superiority. The war baron ordered the message ignored, the appropriate response to such presumption. When the deadline passed, the Thermopylae launched what appeared to be escape pods toward the planet's surface. Ursarian gunners targeted several, but others evaded detection until it was too late. The pods didn't land near the outpost as expected, but instead scattered across a wide area of the surrounding wilderness. Let them hide in the forests, Forlag said dismissively. They will freeze when night falls or be consumed by local predators. Focus defenses on the outpost perimeter. The first indication that the situation had changed came 3 hours later, when Ursarian patrols of the northeast quadrant reported equipment failures. Sentry posts went silent. Perimeter sensors showed unexplained gaps. Forlag deployed additional warriors to reinforce the affected areas, but received no confirmation of their arrival. "What is happening?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Unknown, Commander. Our forces are encountering something in the forest." Reports are fragmented, but they describe shadows moving between trees, devices that emit disorienting sonic pulses, and localized atmospheric alterations that impair thermal vision. Forlag growled in frustration. They're using the environment as a weapon. Typical prey behavior: hiding, confusing, refusing proper combat. Secure the main facility and execute 10 hostages as warning. Before the order could be carried out, the outpost's power grid failed completely. Emergency systems activated, casting the interior in dim red lighting that reduced Ursarian visual advantages. Simultaneously, the environmental systems began cycling rapidly between temperature extremes, creating patches of obscuring condensation throughout the facility. "They've infiltrated our control systems," the tactical officer reported, checking internal sensors. "But how?" "Our encryption." The first Marines entered the facility not through doors or access tunnels, but through maintenance conduits and air filtration systems that should have been too small for any warrior to navigate. They moved in darkness with what appeared to be perfect awareness of their surroundings, using weapons adapted for close-quarters combat. Rather than challenging the Ursarians directly, they focused on creating chaos, disrupting communication systems, triggering emergency protocols, and separating the occupying forces into increasingly isolated groups. Forlag watched in growing rage as his carefully coordinated occupation disintegrated into dozens of disconnected skirmishes. His warriors, trained to fight in formation with interlocking fields of fire, found themselves engaged in a constantly shifting battle against opponents who refused to remain stationary. The humans struck from unexpected angles, retreated before counterattacks could be organized, and systematically targeted command personnel with disabling rather than lethal force. "Fight as warriors," Forlag bellowed over the increasingly unreliable communication system. "Stand your ground and crush these vermin." But standing ground was exactly what the Marines wanted. Each defensive position established by the Ursarians became a target for coordinated strikes from multiple directions. Forlag began to recognize the pattern too late. The humans were not fighting to win territory, but to control the flow of movement through the facility. They were herding his forces, using their own defensive instincts against them. In the command center, Forlag found himself with dwindling options. External communications remained jammed, not by his forces, he now realized, but by the human vessel in orbit. The hostages had been evacuated from secure areas through routes his warriors hadn't even known existed. And most disturbing, the humans had demonstrated intimate knowledge of Ursarian tactical doctrine, consistently countering standard maneuvers before they could be executed. "How do they know?" he demanded of his increasingly nervous staff. "How do they anticipate our responses?" The answer came from an unexpected source. An elderly human scientist who had evaded the initial roundup appeared on the main communication screen, apparently broadcasting from somewhere within the facility. "They studied you," the human said simply. "After your species first contacted ours, We compiled extensive analyses of Ursarian combat footage, physiological responses, and cultural references to warfare. The Marines have been running simulations based on this data for months. They fought this exact battle hundreds of times before you ever arrived. Before Forlag could respond, the lights in the command center extinguished completely. When emergency illumination activated 30 seconds later, he found himself alone except for a single human figure standing by the primary exit. The Marine's armor was matte black with minimal insignia, and the face behind the helmet visor showed no aggression, fear, or excitement, only focused attention. War Baron Forlag, the Marine said with surprising formality. Your forces have been neutralized. Your vessels in orbit have been disabled. You are offered conditional surrender terms that will allow your warriors to depart with their lives and minimal dishonor. Forlag roared and charged, bringing his massive arms to bear in a crushing attack that would have shattered the human spine. The Marines sidestepped with precise economy of movement, using the Ursarian's momentum to direct him into the bulkhead. Before Forlag could recover, he felt a sharp sting at the joint between his armor plates. Paralytic toxin, tailored specifically to Ursarian physiology, spread rapidly through his system. As his limbs grew unresponsive, Forlag found himself being carefully lowered to the floor by the much smaller human. Their faces were briefly level, and he saw still no triumph in the Marine's eyes, only the calm focus of someone completing a well-practiced task. "Ow!" Forlag managed to ask as the paralytic reached his vocal apparatus. "You are not predators. How do you fight this way?" The Marine considered the question with apparent seriousness. "You evolved as apex predators on your world, relying on strength and natural weapons. We evolved as persistence hunters on ours, relying on endurance, tool use, and cooperation. Our ancestors would pursue prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, tracking it for days if necessary." A slight pause. Marines are trained to embrace discomfort, to function when others cannot, to solve problems under conditions designed to break them. Physical strength is useful, but secondary to adaptability and will. As consciousness faded, Forlag understood that he had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the threat. The humans weren't prey species awkwardly attempting to imitate predators. They were something else entirely. Persistence hunters who had turned their evolutionary adaptations toward warfare with terrifying efficiency. The Alliance Council convened an emergency session within days of what quickly became known as the Harmony Incident. For the first time in living memory, a major predator species had been decisively defeated by what most had considered a mid-tier civilization. More disturbing were the details emerging about how this defeat had been accomplished. Not through technological superiority or overwhelming numbers, but through tactics, preparation, and what appeared to be an entirely different conceptualization of combat. The humans employed approximately 200 Marines against an Ursarian force nearly 3 times that size, the Mrevnir analyst explained to the assembled representatives. They suffered minimal casualties while completely neutralizing Dominion forces within 7 hours of engagement. No hostages were lost. The Nithar delegation's antennae quivered with collective agitation. This defies natural order. The Ursarians possess physical capabilities vastly superior to humans. Their battle doctrine has proven effective across 17 major conflicts. The humans did not attempt to match Ursarian physical advantages, the analyst continued dispassionately. Instead, they rendered those advantages irrelevant through environmental manipulation, targeted use of biochemical agents, and tactical mobility. Our preliminary assessment suggests the Marines employ a fundamental philosophical difference in their approach to warfare. The council chambers buzzed with uneasy conversation. The Raptor delegation appeared particularly disturbed, many members unconsciously displaying submission postures when the human representatives entered the chamber for the subsequent diplomatic session. Research teams were hastily assembled across multiple species. Historical archives were analyzed, human military broadcasts intercepted, and cultural references to Marines compiled into increasingly disturbing reports. The emerging picture sent ripples of instinctive alarm through predator species' governing bodies. They train by deliberately inducing physical and psychological stress, one Nithar researcher reported to the High Nest. Their training facilities are designed to break normal operational parameters, forcing adaptation under adverse conditions. They simulate death world conditions regardless of where they operate. Others discovered Earth's long history of intraspecies warfare, revealing combat methodologies refined through thousands of years of humans fighting humans. Unlike most predator species, whose dominance displays and territorial conflicts typically resulted in limited casualties, human military history showed a disturbing pattern of total war concepts. They developed these tactics fighting themselves, an Ursurian military theorist noted with horrified fascination. What we witnessed was the product of an evolutionary crucible we can scarcely comprehend. Most disturbing were the cultural narratives surrounding Marines specifically. Unlike other human military organizations, Marines deliberately cultivated an identity built around transformation. Their induction processes stripped away individual identity and rebuilt recruits according to unit ideals. Their mythology emphasized perseverance beyond normal endurance, adaptability beyond normal parameters, and victory through collective will rather than individual dominance. They are not merely trained, concluded the comprehensive threat assessment delivered to the Alliance Council. They are deliberately reconstructed. Transformation. Within diplomatic channels, the phrase "we'll send in the Marines" acquired sudden gravity. Human negotiators found their positions received with new attentiveness. Trade disputes that had remained deadlocked for years achieved rapid resolution. Border incursions against human colonies ceased entirely. Among the predator species, a subtle but profound physiological reaction began to manifest. Brain scans of Ursarian diplomats showed immediate amygdala activation when the word Marine was spoken in any context. Raptor representatives displayed involuntary submission postures, flattened plumage, lowered eyes, when meeting with human military attaches. Cathar collective neural networks developed new priority pathways that automatically elevated human security concerns above most other diplomatic considerations. Fear had taken root not as a conscious political calculation, but as an instinctive biological response. Decades passed. The initial shock of the Harmony incident faded into historical record, though its implications permanently altered the galactic political landscape. Humans gained a full council seat. Their colonies expanded without the territorial challenges that typically plagued emerging species. Their diplomatic corps achieved disproportionate influence in interstellar affairs. Through it all, the Marine mystique grew beyond the original reality. Stories spread through trading posts and spacer bars, each retelling more elaborate than the last. Marines became 7 feet tall in some accounts, capable of surviving in vacuum without protection in others. They were said to train by fighting battle droids with their bare hands, to undergo surgical modifications that allowed them to see in total darkness, to communicate telepathically during combat operations. The truth hardly mattered. The legend had transcended its origins to become something more powerful, a mimetic trigger for deeply embedded instinctual responses. When border tensions flared between the Cathar and the Mrevner over mining rights in the Cygnus Reach, negotiations deadlocked for months until the human representative casually mentioned that protection of data infrastructure might become a Marine Corps priority given recent developments. The treaty was signed within days. A Raptor raiding party abandoned a lucrative attack on a commerce vessel after discovering a single retired Marine serving as security consultant aboard. The raid leader later reported that continuing the operation would have violated cost-benefit principles, though neurological scans revealed intense fear response patterns triggered by the Marine's identification. In a notorious incident at the Three Spirals Starport Lounge, An intoxicated Ursarian mercenary was loudly recounting his combat exploits to an impressed audience until a quiet human female at the bar turned and simply said, "15th MEU, Force Recon, retired." Witnesses reported the Ursarian immediately displayed full submission posturing and departed without further interaction. The human had never made a threatening move. Scientific confirmation eventually supported what observation had already established. Predator species across the Alliance displayed measurable neurological reactions to marine references that bypassed conscious thought processes. The phenomenon received scholarly classification as reflexive threat recognition response in xenobiological literature, though in less formal contexts, it was simply called marine flinch. For humans, this development created complex cultural ripples. Their species had entered galactic society expecting to occupy a middle tier at best, given their physical limitations compared to the dominant predator species. Finding themselves suddenly elevated to elite status, not through aggression but through proven capability, produced both pride and discomfort. "We never sought to become the bogeyman of the galaxy," General Helena Ortiz remarked during a staff conference at Marine Corps headquarters. "Our operational philosophy remains defensive in nature. We train to protect, not to intimidate." Yet the reality was undeniable. Marines had become living symbols of a fundamentally different approach to power, one that emphasized not natural advantages, but acquired capabilities, not dominance displays, but problem-solving efficiency. It represented an evolutionary paradigm these ancient predator species found profoundly unsettling. The ultimate irony wasn't lost on human historians. A species that had evolved as prey had developed into something that instinctively frightened apex predators, not by becoming better predators themselves, but by transcending the predator-prey dynamic entirely. As one human diplomat explained to a curious Mrevnir colleague, "The word marine triggers fear not because it represents violence or aggression, but because it represents the unknown. We approach problems differently than species evolved from ambush or pursuit. Predators. Our solutions don't make intuitive sense to their neural architectures because we don't think like either predators or prey. We think like survivors, like adapters, like problem solvers willing to endure discomfort to achieve objectives." The Mrevnir considered this thoughtfully. "Your Marines represent the ultimate subversion of established hierarchies. The proof that physical dominance is not the only path to security in a dangerous universe." Exactly. And that realization, that the foundations of power can shift so dramatically, is what truly frightens species accustomed to their place at the top. Throughout inhabited space, the pattern continued. In diplomatic chambers, business negotiations, territorial disputes, and cultural exchanges, the word marine carried weight far beyond its literal meaning. A single syllable could change the trajectory of conversations, alter power dynamics, and influence decisions affecting billions of lives across thousands of worlds. For what truly frightened the great predators was not merely the combat effectiveness Marines had demonstrated, but the paradigm shift they represented. These humans had crafted a fighting force that turned determination into a weapon, adaptability into armor, and cooperative problem-solving into a force more effective than claws, fangs, or overwhelming strength. The word marine had become a reminder that the comfortable certainties of evolutionary advantage could be rendered obsolete by a species that refused to accept its designated role in the natural order. A species that had looked at the limitations imposed by biology and simply decided to overcome them through will, training, and collective action. And that realization, more than any weapon or tactic, was what triggered the instinctive fear response in predator species across the galaxy. For what could be more terrifying to a natural predator than the idea that nature itself could be transcended?